Welcome to Sherlock Shadow Channel, where every story hides a secret. Grab your coffee, sit back, and dive into a world of twists and turns. Tell us where you're watching from. Drop your city and country in the comments. Like, subscribe, and share the thrill with fellow mystery lovers. Let the adventure begin. Hercule Poirot and the Secret in the Engraved Compact Mirror. Chapter 1. A Whisper of Powder and Blood. The autumn sun, low and languid, poured a golden haze over the stone walls of Chateau La Roche, an aging estate tucked into the lavender-strewn hills above Aix-en-Provence. The late afternoon air was laced with perfume, sweet, fading notes of heliotrope and ambergris, as if the house itself exhaled the ghosts of past elegance. On the sun-warmed terrace, where vines curled lazily around wrought iron railings, Madame Vivienne Langlois hosted one of her famous weekend gatherings, curated affairs where charm was currency and secrets moved like smoke through the corridors. From a distance, the affair appeared as charming as ever. Silk dresses whispered across the tile floors, champagne glasses clinked, and laughter scattered like confetti. But just beneath the surface, beneath every polite nod and overly warm greeting, lurked the brittle tension of concealed truths. It was nearing 5 o'clock when the tranquility shattered. The first scream came from the winter salon, a glass-panelled room that opened toward the orchards. It was Odette Marchand, the maid, young, timid, and pale as rice paper. She stood frozen by the open French doors, trembling violently as though struck by lightning. Elle est morte. Mon Dieu, elle est morte. The guests, startled into motion, swarmed like bees toward the source of the scream. Among them were Dr. Lucien Renaud, Vivienne's personal physician, and Inspector Vautrin, who happened, by a twist of fate or invitation too clever to be coincidence, to be attending the same soirée. But it was Vivienne herself who reached the threshold first, her crimson robe brushing against the marble as she pushed past the maid. There, slumped in one of the salon's ivory armchairs, was Madeleine Delacroix. She looked at first glance like she had dozed off, her head resting at a gentle angle, her fingers curled gracefully around the stem of a wineglass. But the pooling crimson stain that bled through the lace bodice of her evening gown, blooming like some ghastly rose, told another story. The mirror behind her caught a perfect reflection of the scene, the limp body, the wineglass, and a compact silver object at her feet, thrown down as though in haste. It was a silver compact mirror, exquisitely engraved with curling Art Nouveau lilies. Its clasp was broken. Powder dust clung to the rim. "She was fine not 20 minutes ago," murmured Vivienne, her voice hollow. "She was laughing, she was—" "Poison," said Dr. Renaud after a perfunctory examination. He glanced up from her lifeless form with a grimace. "Perhaps cyanide. The odor, it lingers." A collective shiver passed through the room. "But how?" asked Claudine Morel, a distant cousin and a frequent guest of the Langlois estate. "She didn't eat anything recently, and she certainly didn't seem ill." "She was applying powder a short while ago," muttered Odette from the doorway, her voice barely a thread. "She had that mirror in her hand. It snapped shut in a strange way, and she dropped it. I didn't think anything of it at the time." Inspector Vautrin stepped forward, motioning for the guests to keep back. "No one is to leave the estate," he announced. "This is now a crime scene. Madame Langlois, I trust your staff can accommodate us for the night." Vivienne nodded numbly. Her eyes remained fixed on Madeleine's lifeless form. Within the hour, gendarmes arrived and began cordoning off rooms. Guests were assigned temporary quarters and asked to remain available for questioning. No one spoke above a whisper. The glamour of the weekend had turned cold and brittle, By nightfall, rain tapped softly against the leaded windows of the estate, and somewhere in the drawing-room, a clock struck 9. That was when the sleek black car arrived. From it stepped a small, impeccably dressed man with an egg-shaped head, a magnificent moustache, and shoes so polished they seemed to gleam despite the drizzle. He stood for a moment beneath the portico, adjusting his cuffs with the precision of a watchmaker. Then he turned to the butler, who waited uncertainly at the door. "Monsieur Hercule Poirot," he announced with a slight bow. "I believe I have been summoned." And with that, the real investigation began. Chapter 2. Powder on Porcelain. The great hall of Château Laroche had changed character overnight. Once alive with music and sparkling conversation, it now bore the hush of a chapel. Shadows stretched long across the checkered marble floor, broken only by the flicker of electric sconces and the low murmur of gendarmes speaking in clipped, official tones. Hercule Poirot stood by the ornate fireplace, examining a carved cherub's face with detached interest. He had been shown into the room by Inspector Vautrin, who now lingered. By the windows with folded arms and a restless foot tapping the stone. The two men could not have made a more striking contrast. Vautrin, all rugged impatience and rustic certainty; Poirot, a study in meticulous elegance. "Murder by compact mirror," Vautrin muttered finally, with the air of someone speaking a line he didn't quite believe. "Ingenious, if it was the powder. But there are easier ways to kill." Poirot did not turn from the fireplace. "Easier, perhaps, but not more theatrical. And murder, mon ami, is often committed not for simplicity, but for effect." Vautrin grunted. "There were 10 people on the estate this afternoon. Guests, staff, and yourself now. Until I have proof otherwise, everyone is a suspect." Poirot nodded mildly. As it should be. The body had been removed and sealed away in the estate's wine cellar, the only cool place in such a sprawling house that could serve temporarily as a morgue. But the winter salon remained undisturbed under Poirot's instructions. Now accompanied by Odette Marchand, still pale, still trembling, he entered the room with the reverence of a man stepping onto a stage. I already told the inspector what I saw," Odette murmured, as Poirot closed the salon door gently behind them. "And now, mademoiselle," he said kindly, "you shall tell me. Not what you think you saw. What you truly saw." Odette swallowed. "I was coming to collect the empty glasses. Just before sunset, Madame Delacroix was alone here, sitting by the open doors. She had the little mirror in her lap, and she was reapplying her powder." Poirot's gaze moved to the chair, the glass, the mirror now sealed in a paper evidence bag. "And did she speak?" "Only once. She said something like, 'It still smells like lilies. I hate lilies.'" Poirot raised a brow, curious. She closed the mirror, quickly, too quickly. It snapped. She looked startled and dropped it. Then she leaned back and... Odette hesitated. "And she didn't move again. At first I thought she'd just fainted. But then her head fell sideways." Poirot nodded slowly. "And this mirror, was it hers?" I don't think so. I've seen her use another one. A gold one. This one, the silver one. I'd never seen it before, but she had it all afternoon." Poirot paced to the French doors and looked out into the fading garden beyond. Crickets chirped softly. "Who brought the mirror into the house?" "I don't know." "And no one visited her in the salon?" "Number Madame Vivienne had gone to take a phone call. The others were still on the terrace." Poirot turned sharply. "And who are these others, mademoiselle?" She hesitated. "Well, Madame Claudine, Dr. Reynaud, Monsieur Roland Aubry, the playwright, and Madame Langlois herself, of course, also Mr. Fairfax, the Englishman, and Mademoiselle Eloise Martel, the young pianist. Bon. That makes 7. And the staff? Only myself and Chef Bernard, who never left the kitchen, and my younger brother Jean, who does the grounds. Poirot gave a small, satisfied nod. So, a closed circle. Odette wrung her hands. She was so beautiful, Monsieur Poirot. Everyone adored her. Poirot's moustache twitched. Oh no, mademoiselle. That is never true. The beautiful, they are often admired, sometimes envied, but rarely adored, especially by those who know them well. He dismissed the maid with gentle politeness and returned to the center of the room. His eyes fell again on the silver compact, still faintly dusted with loose powder, despite the care with which it had been preserved. He studied the floral engravings. Lilies, yes, but one corner was chipped, as though it had fallen before. He leaned closer. A faint reddish smear clung to the inner clasp. Lipstick? No, something darker. Blood, perhaps. Or crushed pill residue. He turned to Vautrin, who had re-entered silently. May I request that this compact be sent to a laboratory in Paris? Discreetly. I suspect we will find something quite unique in its mechanism. Vautrin nodded reluctantly. If it gets us closer to a motive. Poirot gave a faint smile. Ah, non. I do not search for motive yet. Motives are everywhere. What I search for now is something far rarer. And what's that? Intention, Poirot murmured, eyes narrowing. The how, not the why. Because in a murder such as this, beautiful, theatrical, silent, the method is the message. He stepped out into the corridor, where the estate's guests were now being quietly gathered for questioning. The grand weekend had become something else entirely. The masks had not yet fallen, but Hercule Poirot was listening for the first crack. Chapter 3. Guests in the Gilded Cage. The drawing room had been hastily converted into an impromptu interview chamber, with armchairs arranged in an informal semicircle and a tray of untouched coffee cooling on a sideboard. The fire crackled behind the ornate grate, but the warmth it offered did little to ease the chill settling over the assembled guests. Madame Vivienne Langlois stood by the mantelpiece, draped in a sable shawl that did not quite hide the tension in her shoulders. Her once renowned poise was now tinged with unease. She lifted a delicate porcelain cup, her fingers trembling slightly, then placed it back down without drinking. Hercule Poirot entered the room without ceremony, his steps precise, his eyes sharp. Inspector Vautrin followed, arms crossed like a door meant to stay shut. Mesdames, Messieurs, Poirot began, his voice calm but unmistakably commanding. You will forgive the informality of this gathering, but I find it most useful to observe people not when they are alone, rehearsing their innocence, but when they are together, surrounded by their lies. There was a subtle intake of breath from one corner, Claudine Morel, who quickly lowered her gaze. Madame Langlois composed herself. Of course, Monsieur Poirot. Anything that aids the investigation. Poirot offered a nod of gratitude, then surveyed the guests. Let us not speak of the crime directly. Not yet. Instead, I would like each of you to tell me, simply, what you remember from the afternoon. It was Roland Aubry who spoke first. The playwright, tall and theatrically lean, leaned forward with folded hands. I was on the terrace for most of the day, sketching out dialogue, drinking just enough wine to pretend I was still clever. Poirot's eyes twinkled. And Mademoiselle Delacroix, did you speak with her? She came to the table briefly, around 3. We argued over syntax. Syntax? Vautrin interjected with a raised brow. Roland gave a tight smile. She thought my female characters lacked empathy. I told her she mistook clarity for coldness, our usual routine. Poirot turned to the next guest. Dr. Reynaud. The physician brushed a speck of lint from his sleeve before replying. I had a patient consultation by telephone from 4 to 4:30. Before that, I was on the terrace as well. Madeleine was in fine spirits. I certainly saw no sign of distress. And after your call? I returned to the terrace. Madeleine had gone inside by then. Poirot gave a slight nod and turned to Claudine Morel. She sat rigidly, fingers twisting a handkerchief in her lap. She was my friend, Claudine said softly. Though we had not been as close recently, she'd grown distant and sharp. That's the truth of it. Sharp how, madame? Claudine hesitated. She had a way of knowing things that unsettled people. She made everyone uncomfortable this weekend, as if she were waiting to say something devastating. Poirot filed that away silently. Mr. Fairfax, the Englishman with a sun-weathered face and the quiet demeanour of an observant statue, gave a stiff nod when asked for his recollection. I was walking the orchard paths alone before the storm rolled in. I didn't speak with the lady at all. Convenient, murmured Vautrin. Poirot raised a hand. And Mademoiselle Martel? Eloise Martel, barely 20, sat curled like a sparrow on the edge of a velvet chair. Her eyes were red-rimmed from silent weeping. She was kind to me, the only one who remembered I was here for music, not money or gossip. She asked me to play Debussy earlier, said it soothed her. She seemed worried. Not worried, Eloise said after a pause. Determined, like someone who had decided something very important. Poirot's eyes flicked to Vivienne. And you, madame? Where were you when the tragedy occurred? Vivienne looked directly at him. On the telephone. My estate agent in Marseille. You may confirm the call if needed. Oh, I intend to. But I wonder, Madame Langlois. Poirot's voice softened. Was there a quarrel between you and Mademoiselle Delacroix recently? Vivienne's lips tightened. We had words, yes. She accused me of something cruel. I chose not to dignify it with an answer. Poirot bowed his head slightly. And what, may I ask, was the accusation? There was a silence, deeper than any before it. That I had stolen something from her, Vivienne replied at last. An idea, a truth. She never specified which. Poirot did not press further. The room had begun to turn inward, each person retreating into private memory. He smiled gently, as if to release the tension. Merci. That will be all, for now. But I must caution you all. The murderer, c'est certain, is among us. As he stepped out of the room, Poirot murmured to himself in that quiet tone he used when addressing only his little grey cells. She was not poisoned because she was beautiful, no. Nor because she was feared. She was poisoned because she knew something. And he intended to find out what. Chapter 4. The Arrival of Shadows. That evening, as darkness crept gently across the hills of Provence, the golden light within Château Laroche began to dim. Candles flickered in sconces along the hallways. The laughter that once echoed down its polished corridors had long since vanished, replaced by muffled footsteps and whispers behind closed doors. The house, Poirot noted, was beginning to breathe in suspicion. Dinner had been a hushed affair. Though Madame Langlois had insisted on serving a meal, for the sake of appearances, she had murmured, the clinking of silverware on porcelain could not mask the absence of conversation. Each guest seemed caught in their own web of reflection and calculation, unsure where to direct their gaze. Poirot, meanwhile, ate with his usual precision, observing everything and everyone between bites of soupe au pistou. He took note of Claudine Morel's downcast eyes, the way Roland Aubry dabbed at a spotless napkin too often, and how Eloise Martel barely touched her food. Mr. Fairfax sat like a granite statue, inscrutable. Vivienne, for her part, maintained a brave facade, her posture regal, but the tremble in her wine-glass when she reached for it betrayed her nerves. After dinner, Poirot retired to the study with Inspector Vautrin, who appeared increasingly restless, tugging at his collar like a man unused to sitting still. "We are no closer than we were this afternoon," Vautrin grumbled. "They're all lying in one way or another." Poirot leaned back in the leather chair and steepled his fingers. "They are. But lying and murdering are not the same thing, mon ami. Many lie to protect pride, or fear, or reputation. That does not make them killers." Vautrin grunted. "What about Vivienne? That argument, whatever it was, could be our motive." "Ah, but the motive is not enough," Poirot replied softly. "You must consider the stage upon which the murder played out. A poisoned compact mirror, a method elegant, theatrical, symbolic even. That is not the work of mere anger. It is the expression of something cultivated." There was a knock on the door. It was Odette. "Pardon, Monsieur Poirot. Madame Langlois says you may use the green salon for private interviews if you prefer. The guests have all retired to their rooms." "Merci, mademoiselle. That is most kind." As she turned to leave, Poirot called after her gently. "One moment, if you please. Tell me, was Mademoiselle Delacroix wearing perfume today?" Odette blinked. "Oui, monsieur. A strong one. She always wore it." "Did it smell of lilies?" Odette nodded, surprised. "Yes, exactly like lilies." "Interesting," Poirot murmured. "Très intéressant." By the time he entered the green salon, a more intimate space lined with art books and framed watercolors, the house had settled into its uneasy stillness. He requested that Claudine Morel be brought to him first. She entered hesitantly, still in her dinner gown, hands clasped tightly in front of her. Poirot gestured to a cushioned chair. "Please, madam. Sit." She did so, but her spine remained stiff. Her eyes searched his face for mercy, or perhaps advantage. "Tell me," Poirot began, his tone gentle, "how long had you and Mademoiselle Delacroix known each other?" "Since we were girls," Claudine said with a faint, nostalgic smile. "We attended the same finishing school in Geneva. She was always the clever one, the daring one." "But," Claudine's fingers tensed, "but she had a way of looking at you as if she knew your weaknesses, and enjoyed it. You envied her." "I feared her," Claudine whispered, "not for what she might do with her hands, but what she could do with her words." Poirot tilted his head. "Did she threaten you recently?" Claudine hesitated. "Not exactly. But she hinted that she had written something. A story, she said. Fiction, of course. But she warned that some people might recognize themselves in it." "A veiled threat?" "She liked to watch people squirm." Poirot leaned forward slightly. "And did you see the silver mirror before this afternoon?" "Number." "It wasn't hers. You're sure?" "She carried a gold one, always. This silver one, it was new." "Merci, madame," Poirot said, rising. "That will be all for now." She stood, hesitated, and then asked, almost pleadingly, "Do you think the killer will strike again?" Poirot's gaze was unreadable. "That depends, madame. If the killer believes someone else knows too much, then yes, it is very possible." After she left, Poirot stood alone in the silence, the firelight casting shadows across the floor like ink spilled on parchment. He did not yet have a killer, but he now had something nearly as valuable: fear. And fear, he knew, had a way of loosening tongues. Chapter 5 The first. Threads unravel. The following morning arrived with a hush. Mist clung to the rolling hills around Chateau La Roche, softening the edges of everything. Even the gravel path seemed to tread lightly beneath the feet of the waking staff. Inside the estate, breakfast was a quiet affair, if it happened at all. Most guests kept to their rooms. Some paced the corridors under the illusion of casual strolls. Others stood by windows, staring out as though expecting answers from the pale sky. In the green salon, Poirot once again positioned himself near the fireplace, hands folded neatly in his lap. He had slept little. Instead, he had spent the early hours walking the corridors of the estate, listening. Not for footsteps or whispers, but for silences. Those long, deliberate absences of sound that suggested someone trying not to be noticed. Inspector Vautrin appeared shortly after 9, carrying a brown folder. His face was taut with fatigue. "I had the compact sent to Paris first thing," he said, "but I asked my man at the lab for a preliminary visual. There's a hidden compartment in the base, very small. Powder residue consistent with atropine, but they'll confirm soon. Highly toxic if inhaled." Poirot's eyes lit up. Atropine, a rare choice. Not easily procured, not easily detected, but how clever. A puff of poisoned powder disguised as vanity. This was not a crime of impulse, mon ami. It was theatre. Vautrin tossed the folder on the desk. "I don't like it. Too elaborate. It suggests someone with time to plan, someone familiar with her habits, and if the mirror wasn't hers, then someone ensured she would be the one to open it," Poirot finished. "Exactly." A soft knock interrupted them. Odette stood in the doorway, hesitant as always. "Monsieur Poirot? The English gentleman, Mr. Fairfax. He says he'll speak with you now." "Ah, yes," Poirot said, rising. "Please, show him in." Charles Fairfax entered with the air of a man used to formalities. His blazer was pressed, his collar stiff, his gaze politely distant. "You wish to see me," he said simply. Poirot gestured toward a chair. "Merci, monsieur. It will not take long." Fairfax sat, arms resting lightly on the armrests. "I assume this is about Madeleine." "Indeed. I understand you took a walk through the orchards yesterday afternoon." "Yes." "Alone?" "Yes." Poirot raised a brow. "Forgive me, monsieur, but in a house filled with conversation and wine, why choose solitude?" Fairfax gave the ghost of a smile. "Because conversation tires me, and wine makes people forget themselves." A curious statement. Not really. People say things they regret, reveal more than they intend. I prefer clarity. Poirot studied him for a long moment. "Were you acquainted with Mademoiselle Delacroix?" "In passing. She was not fond of me." "And why is that?" Fairfax shrugged slightly. "She disliked restraint, and English restraint in particular. She found it suspicious." Poirot allowed himself a slight smile. "She was correct to be suspicious. Restraint hides many things." "I assure you I have nothing to hide." Poirot's gaze narrowed. "And yet, when I asked the others about Madeleine's mood yesterday, they described her as confident, almost confrontational. But you say nothing of her mood. You describe only your own." Fairfax leaned forward slightly. "And what does that suggest, Monsieur Poirot?" Poirot met his gaze calmly. "It suggests that you are speaking carefully, too carefully, as though you have rehearsed what not to say." Fairfax's expression did not change, but his fingers tightened slightly against the leather chair arms. "I've lived long enough to know that in situations like these, the less one says, the better." Poirot nodded slowly. "You are not wrong, monsieur. But there comes a moment when silence, too, begins to speak." He let the words hang for a moment before gesturing toward the door. Merci, that is all for now. After Fairfax had gone, Poirot remained seated for several minutes, his eyes fixed not on the door but on the mirror that hung above the fireplace. He tilted his head. A mirror. A woman poisoned through vanity. A silver compact engraved with lilies, hated by the victim, left in her path. Everything about the act had been symbolic, and symbolism, he knew, rarely existed without history. Poirot rose suddenly and stepped into the hallway, his shoes clicking crisply on the tiles. He turned left toward the guest wing, bypassing the drawing room entirely. There was one person he had not yet spoken to in detail, Eloise Martel. A pianist may not seem threatening, but art, Poirot believed, often stood far too close to secrets. Chapter 6. The Pianist's Pause. Eloise Martel's room was on the east wing, smaller than the others, overlooking the vineyards where morning mist still clung to the lowest branches. Poirot knocked twice before entering. She stood by the window, her silhouette outlined against the pale light. She turned, startled, though not frightened. "Monsieur Poirot," she said softly, "I was expecting you." He inclined his head. "Mademoiselle, you are very perceptive." "I am a musician," she replied with a ghost of a smile. "We are trained to notice subtle shifts in rhythm." Poirot stepped into the room, glancing briefly around. A music folio lay open on the writing desk, Debussy's Clair de Lune. The pages were worn, creased at the edges. A metronome sat beside a jewelry case, and a single white lily in a glass vase. "You still practice, even now?" he asked. "Always," she said. "It's the only thing that calms my mind." "And yet you do not seem calm." Eloise's lips tightened, and she looked away. How could anyone be calm after what happened? Poirot moved to the desk, trailing a finger over the edge of the sheet music. "Tell me, mademoiselle, how well did you know Mademoiselle Delacroix?" Well enough to know that she did not trust easily, and that she rarely forgot a slight. "A friend, then?" "An admirer, once," Eloise said, surprising him. "When I was younger, she had that glow, the kind you want to touch, even knowing you'll burn your fingers. But no, she was not my friend, not truly. And yet she requested you to play for her yesterday." "She said my playing reminded her of something," Eloise replied, voice distant. She didn't say what. Was she distracted, nervous, number, composed, too composed? It was as if she'd made peace with something dreadful. Poirot turned toward her. "Did she mention a silver compact mirror?" Eloise's brow furrowed. "Only once. She pulled it out just before she left the salon. She looked at it and said, 'Strange, isn't it? How something so lovely can hold something so vile.' I thought she was speaking about herself, and you had never seen it before?" She hesitated, then shook her head. "Number. But I noticed it was older, worn around the hinges, like something taken out of hiding." Poirot paced to the window, noting the view. The mirror was engraved with lilies, yet Odette said Madeleine despised the scent of lilies. She commented on it moments before her death. "She did hate them," Eloise said quickly. "She once told me they reminded her of funerals. Then why would she carry a mirror adorned with them?" "Perhaps she didn't know," Eloise murmured. "Or perhaps she wanted to make a statement." Poirot turned. "A statement?" Eloise nodded slowly. "Madeleine liked symbols. She once told me she used them like mirrors, reflections twisted to suit her purpose. If she knew the mirror was dangerous, she might have carried it anyway, to make someone else believe she was one step ahead." Poirot's expression did not change, but inside, his thoughts churned. Had Madeleine known the mirror was a trap? Had she wanted someone to see her use it? One final performance. "One last question, mademoiselle," he said. "Where were you just before she was found?" "In the music room," Eloise replied without pause. "Alone. Practicing. No one came in. I'm sure of it." Poirot gave her a courteous bow. "Merci, mademoiselle. That will be all for now." As he stepped into the corridor once more, the hush of the estate seemed to press in closer. The walls had begun to whisper. Madeleine had not died in fear. She had died on her own terms. A woman cornered, perhaps, but still in control of her stage. Poirot walked slowly, his fingers tapping lightly against his lapel. There was something about that mirror, its sudden appearance, its symbolism, its placement. It hadn't just been a weapon, it had been a message, and someone in this house had written it. Chapter 7. A Playwright's Mask. By midday, the grey veil over the hills had begun to lift, revealing the estate's golden facade once more. But within Château La Roche, no warmth returned. The house had turned inward, its guests drifting through the corridors like ghosts, too proud to admit they were afraid. Poirot returned to the green salon and requested that Roland Aubry be brought in next. The playwright entered with his usual flair, a velvet jacket slung carelessly over one shoulder, a silk scarf knotted at his throat, and eyes that darted about the room like an actor seeking his mark. "Ah, Monsieur Poirot," he said, settling into the armchair without invitation. "I trust you've come to extract some grand confession?" Poirot offered a slight smile. "Not at all, monsieur. I merely hope to understand your script." "Script?" "Yes. You see, every gathering, especially one such as this, is a play, a tragedy perhaps, each guest a character. And you, as a playwright, know, better than most, that characters often wear masks." Roland chuckled, brushing invisible lint from his sleeve. "I write characters, monsieur. I do not become them." "That is precisely what concerns me," Poirot said softly. A flicker of unease passed over Roland's face, but it vanished almost as quickly. "So then, what scene would you like me to perform?" Poirot folded his hands. "Let us begin with Madeleine Delacroix. What was your relationship?" Roland leaned back, exhaling through his nose. "She was difficult, brilliant, infuriating. She despised mediocrity, which made her a poor dinner guest, but a superb critic. I valued her opinion, though it wounded." "Did she wound you recently?" Roland tilted his head, as though considering whether to lie. "She read the first act of my new play last month. Told me it was thin, lacked blood. I told her the same might be said of her affections." "And how did she respond?" "She laughed. But it wasn't kind laughter, it was surgical." Poirot let the silence sit between them for a moment. "Monsieur Aubry, did you ever hear Madeleine speak of writing something herself?" "A memoir, perhaps. She hinted at it. Said truth made for better fiction than fantasy ever could." "Did she mention any names?" "Only one," Roland said slowly. "Vivienne. Ah. She claimed Vivienne had stolen something from her. Something private." "Did she specify?" "Number. But she said she'd found a way to make her remember. That whatever had been taken would be returned." Poirot's eyes sharpened. "How dramatic." "Indeed," Roland replied. "Madeleine never did anything quietly." Poirot stood and walked to the sideboard, idly adjusting a stack of books. "Monsieur Aubry, yesterday, where were you between 4 and 5? "In the rose garden, alone. You did not see Madeleine go into the winter salon." "Number." but I heard the scream. Odette's voice could shatter glass. And this mirror, this compact, did you recognize it? Roland hesitated. Number. But it looked antique, familiar in style, perhaps. Could have been a stage prop, for all I know. Poirot turned, his gaze now steady. Do you collect such items? Roland smiled, but his eyes did not. I collect moments, monsieur, not trinkets. Poirot nodded slowly. Very well, monsieur. That will be all. As Roland stood, he paused at the door. You know, he said, you're wrong about one thing. Ah? This isn't a tragedy, he said, his voice lowering. It's a revenge play. The curtain has only just lifted. After he left, Poirot remained still, hands folded behind his back, staring out the window. Madeleine had made enemies, that much was clear. But not of the petty sort. These were enemies made through betrayal, through exposed truths and unforgiven trespasses. Each of them, in their own way, was trying to rewrite her, and someone had chosen to end her chapter altogether. Chapter 8. A Second Silence. By late afternoon, the sun had returned, bright and sharp, illuminating every inch of the estate's manicured gardens. But its light only seemed to deepen the shadows within the house. The tension that had lingered since Madeleine Delacroix's death had thickened, turned sour. Poirot could feel it in the way footsteps quickened in the halls, in the way glances avoided mirrors, and how every polite knock carried a second of hesitation before the door opened. It was during this uneasy stillness that the second scream came. Poirot was in the library, scanning the titles in Madame Langlois' collection, mostly French poets and antique volumes on aesthetics, when the shriek rang out, sharp and cracking through the afternoon like glass breaking. He moved quickly, not running, but with a purposeful stride that parted the air. By the time he reached the first-floor corridor, Inspector Vautrin was already bounding up the stairs, pistol drawn. The guests had begun to emerge again from their rooms, alarmed, murmuring. Claudine clutched the banister. Roland looked pale. The scream had come from the room at the end of the hall, Eloise Martel's. Poirot reached it just as Vautrin threw open the door. Eloise stood by her bed, both hands pressed to her mouth, her face colourless, eyes wide with a terror so deep it seemed to hollow her out. It's gone, she whispered. Poirot stepped past Vautrin, his eyes scanning the room. Nothing appeared out of place. Her violin case remained on the chair. The lily in its vase still stood. Her trunk was shut. What is gone, mademoiselle? He asked calmly. She turned toward him, still breathless. The music box, the one Madeleine gave me. It was old, silver, engraved. I kept it on the table. It's gone. Vautrin lowered his pistol. You're certain it wasn't misplaced? I don't move it, she said. It was a gift, a strange one, but she said it belonged to her mother. She gave it to me the night before she died. Poirot stepped closer to the empty space on the table. A small outline in the dust confirmed her claim. Something had indeed stood there until very recently. Did she say why she gave it to you? He asked. Eloise shook her head. Only that I would understand it one day, that it had been silent for years, and now it was time someone listened. Vautrin gave Poirot a sharp glance. Do you think this was stolen for its value? Poirot's eyes were fixed on the dust imprint. Non, I believe it was stolen because of what it contains. A second poison? Vautrin asked. Perhaps not literal, Poirot said softly. But dangerous, yes. Madeleine gave away a memory, and now someone has made sure it cannot speak again. He turned to Eloise. Was it locked? Yes, there was a little key. Do you have it? She moved shakily to her vanity drawer and retrieved a small brass key. Poirot took it gently and examined it. Simple, well worn. This box. Had it played music recently? She nodded. Last night. I opened it. It played a strange tune I didn't recognize, a few discordant notes. Did it stop on its own? It jammed, then stopped. Poirot's expression sharpened. And did you open it again? Number. I left it closed. Poirot exchanged a glance with Vautrin. I would like the guests gathered again, he said. Now. As Vautrin left, Poirot lingered beside Eloise. Mademoiselle, he said gently, you must not be afraid. Whoever took the box, they are afraid, and fear, when stirred, grows desperate. She nodded, tears threatening the edges of her eyes. Do you think Madeleine knew she would die? Poirot gave the faintest of nods. Yes, I believe she suspected it, and she left behind more than one clue. The mirror was a performance. The box, perhaps the true message. He took the key and slipped it into his pocket. Whatever secrets Madeleine Delacroix had encoded in music or mirrors, someone was now racing to erase them. But Hercule Poirot had already heard the silence, and he knew where it pointed next. Chapter 9. A Memory Stolen. Twice. The guests gathered once more in the drawing room, this time under no illusion of comfort. The velvet curtains had been drawn back to let in the afternoon light, but the mood remained grey and heavy. Vivian stood near the fireplace with a glass of sherry she barely touched. Claudine sat on the edge of her chair, both hands clenched tightly in her lap. Mr. Fairfax paced in slow, deliberate steps near the bookshelves. Roland lounged on a chaise, but his usual languor had given way to an unnatural stillness. Only Eloise was absent, resting upstairs under Odette's watch. Poirot entered last, his steps quiet, his gaze moving from one face to the next. In his hand was the small brass key, the one from Eloise's vanished music box. Mademoiselle Martel has suffered a second violation, he began, voice measured but firm. Something was taken from her room, a gift left by Mademoiselle Delacroix on the night before her death, a silver music box. There was a subtle ripple in the room, just a twitch of posture from Vivian, a tightening of Roland's jaw, the way Mr. Fairfax stopped pacing for half a beat. Poirot, of course, noted all of it. This object, he continued, was not valuable in itself. It was old, worn, and it no longer played its full tune, but I suspect it contained something the killer feared. Vautrin stood nearby, arms crossed. You're suggesting the murder was not the end of it? Exactement, Poirot said, eyes glinting. It was only the first act. The theft is Act 2. He walked to the sideboard, setting the small key down with an audible click. This key opens the box, but it may also unlock something else. A memory, a confession, perhaps even a threat. Roland leaned forward. You think Madeleine left a message in that box? I do, and I believe she knew it might not reach its intended audience. And who was that? Asked Claudine. Poirot looked at her for a long moment before replying. Anyone who would listen. Anyone innocent. Vivienne's voice cut in, brittle. You're implying someone here is desperate enough to destroy even her last words? Poirot gave a small bow of the head. No, madame. I am stating it plainly. A charged silence followed. Finally, Mr. Fairfax spoke. Do you have proof? Number. Not yet, but I have pattern and psychology. He began to walk, slow circles around the room. The mirror was symbolic. The lilies, something Madeleine despised. The compact, an item not her own, but one made to appear as if it belonged to her. Why? Because the killer knew her habits, knew how she powdered her face, knew what she would reach for without question. He paused by the window. Now the music box disappears. Why? Because it had been left with someone she trusted. Someone harmless, or so the killer thought. But Mademoiselle Eloise is not a fool. She noticed. He turned, letting his eyes meet each guest in turn. You all had your reasons to dislike Madeleine. Some of you feared what she knew. Others resented how she saw you. She had a gift for peeling back facades. His gaze landed on Roland. She told you your characters lacked blood. I think she meant you had grown too clever with words, monsieur, and not honest enough. Then on Claudine. She said she'd written something that might expose truths best left buried. Then on Vivienne. She accused you of theft, not of jewels, but of identity, of history. Vivienne's jaw tightened. She was obsessed with the past. She saw ghosts where there were none. Perhaps, Poirot allowed gently, but she also saw patterns. And it seems she feared one of you would silence her before she could speak them aloud. A knock interrupted the tension. It was Odette, eyes wide. She stepped into the room carrying a folded scrap of paper. I found this under Mademoiselle Eloise's pillow, she said. Poirot took the note and unfolded it slowly. His eyes moved across the page with measured attention. Well? Vautrin asked, stepping closer. Poirot raised his head. It's only a single sentence, unsigned, but unmistakably her hand. He read it aloud. If you find this, the music has stopped, because someone could not bear to hear the truth. A long silence followed. The note was handed to Vautrin for inspection. Poirot moved toward the fire, eyes narrowed. The killer is not merely fearful. They are controlled, methodical. Each action has been deliberate. They are removing traces, one by one. And what do we do now? Asked Claudine, her voice tight. Poirot's reply was immediate. We provoke them. We flush them out. How? Asked Roland. Poirot turned to face them, his voice cool and certain. By showing them that Madeleine is still speaking. And with that, he exited the room, quietly, but with the fire of purpose in his step. The next act, he knew, was his to write. Chapter 10. The Trap Behind the Tune. Later that evening, the grand piano in the music room stood open for the first time since Madeleine's death. Its keys, once a background to laughter and toasts, now waited in silence beneath the dim chandelier. Poirot stood beside it, gazing at the polished surface as if examining the face of a suspect. Eloise Martel entered slowly, her posture still brittle from the shock of the morning's theft. She had agreed, with some hesitation, to help. The others would be called in shortly, but for now only she and Poirot remained in the music room, the fire casting long shadows over the carved mahogany panels. Poirot gestured to the piano stool. Mademoiselle, you remember the tune the music box played? I do, she whispered. It was fragmented, haunting. It stopped partway through. Would you be so kind, he said gently, as to play what you recall? Eloise sat and flexed her fingers. Then, with hesitant precision, she began. A series of high, lilting notes drifted into the air, followed by a minor chord that hung, unresolved. Poirot closed his eyes as he listened. Then came the discord, 2 jarring notes, and silence. She lifted her hands. That's where it ended, she said quietly. Poirot opened his eyes. You see, it begins as something soft, wistful, but something interrupts it. A mistake or a warning? He turned to the corner of the room, where Inspector Vautrin leaned against the wall with arms folded. You heard it too, did you not? Vautrin gave a curt nod. Doesn't sound like much to me, just broken music. Poirot smiled faintly. But broken things, mon ami, often point to where the damage began. He turned to Eloise. And did Madeleine ever say where the box had come from? Eloise nodded. She said it was her mother's, that it was part of something Vivienne had once owned. Curious, Poirot said, eyes narrowing, because Vivienne claims no memory of it. The door creaked open. Odette stepped in and announced, "The guests are gathered in the drawing room, monsieur." "Bon," Poirot replied. "Please inform them I shall arrive shortly, but I would like one thing placed on the piano before I do." He pulled something from his pocket, a silver coin glinting in the firelight. Eloise looked at it. "That's not—" "No," Poirot said. "It's only meant to look like the mirror's twin, a little misdirection. Let us see who notices." Once the coin was positioned upright on the piano lid, Poirot took a slow breath. He was not merely seeking a killer now. He was testing how far fear would reach when a message could no longer be buried. In the drawing room, the guests waited once more, their expressions tight, their words clipped. Vautrin watched them silently as Poirot entered with all the calm of a man entering a theatre for the final act. "Mes amis," he said, "we shall not stay long tonight. Only long enough to listen." He turned toward the door. "Mademoiselle Eloise, if you please." She entered and crossed to the piano. The room went utterly still. She began to play. The same haunting melody filled the air once more, soft, tremulous, incomplete. The discord struck like a shiver, but this time, when it reached the silence, she let her fingers linger. And then she added a new note. One soft key, then another. She continued, as if finishing something that had waited too long. As the last notes faded, Poirot spoke. "That is how I believe it was meant to end. Not with chaos, but with choice." Vivienne rose slightly from her chair. "What is this meant to prove?" Poirot smiled at her. That Madeleine was not simply killed, she was silenced, and the tune she left behind, however fragmented, was not meant to be forgotten, but remembered, even feared. His eyes scanned the room. The mirror, the lilies, the stolen music box, each one a signal. Someone here has tried to erase the past. But music, like memory, has a way of returning when you least expect it. He let the silence stretch. And then he added, with perfect calm, "Tomorrow, I will speak with each of you again. But tonight, listen to what she left behind." Poirot turned and exited, leaving the room shrouded in the same silence that had followed Madeleine's final breath. Only now, the silence carried weight, and someone among them was beginning to crack beneath it. Chapter 11. Beneath the lilies' bloom. The next morning, Chateau Laroche awoke under an oppressive stillness. Not the peace of resolution, but the breathless quiet that comes before revelation. Rain had begun to fall, soft, insistent, and the pale light that crept into the estate had no warmth in it. It caught on the rain-speckled windows and dripped like glass tears along the sills. Poirot moved through the halls, as if pacing the chambers of a mind he had already memorized. He was quiet, observant, allowing the estate to speak to him. And it did, through creaking floorboards, an out-of-place glove on the banister, the smell of roses masking something less pleasant. He did not knock before entering Madame Langlois' private sitting room. She looked up from her armchair, still in her dressing robe, a black velvet ribbon pinned at her throat like mourning disguised as fashion. The fire was lit. A single crystal glass of untouched sherry sat beside her on a mahogany tray. "Monsieur Poirot," she said, lifting her chin, "have you come to accuse me?" "I have come to listen," he replied, sitting opposite her. "You may yet save yourself some pain." Vivienne smiled, but the smile had grown thin. You speak like a doctor about to deliver poor news. I speak like a man who has seen many women carry secrets far longer than is wise. She looked at the flames. Madeleine knew how to hurt with elegance. I suspect you already understand that. What you don't know is how deeply she dug to do it. Poirot said nothing. Vivian sighed. Years ago she was nothing, a girl with ambition and no name. I helped her, gave her introductions, encouraged her to stay at the estate as a companion while I travelled. You treated her like a younger sister? Poirot asked. No, Vivienne said, more like a shadow, harmless, until I realized she was imitating me, dressing as I did, mimicking my handwriting, reading my journals. She even began to repeat phrases I used in conversation, pass them off as her own. She wanted to become you. Or replace me. Poirot leaned forward. Did she succeed? Vivienne flinched, just slightly. She took something I wrote, a short story I never published, gave it to a publisher under her own name. It was printed in a small literary journal. A few paragraphs, hardly noticed. But I noticed. And she knew you had. Vivian's fingers tightened around the armrest. She never confessed, but she would mention the title at odd moments. Look at me a second too long when someone praised her insight. She wanted me to feel it, to remember. And so you invited her back. She invited herself. Poirot tilted his head. And did she bring the mirror? Vivian blinked. Number I hadn't seen it in years. But I recognized it instantly when the police showed it to me. It was yours? Yes. A family heirloom. I lost it ages ago. I assumed it had been misplaced by a maid. But now I wonder. Poirot stood slowly. You see, madame, this is precisely what I feared. What do you mean? He turned, to face her fully. You thought you had buried the memory. Madeleine exhumed it. Then she gave it back to you, not directly, but symbolically. That mirror, the lilies, the scent. She orchestrated it all so that her death would lead back to you, not as a killer, but as a thief of something intangible. Legacy, identity. Vivian's voice dropped to a whisper. Then why am I still alive? Because you were never the target, Poirot said gently. You were the setting, the backdrop. Her performance needed a stage, and Chateau La Roche was her theatre. He turned to leave, then paused. One final question, madame. Did Madeleine ever mention a man named Etienne? Vivienne's expression flickered. Yes, briefly, years ago. I believe he was her father. And what did she say of him? She said he was dead. Poirot nodded slowly. Not dead, absent, and absence, like silence, can be made to speak. He left her there, staring into the fire. As he stepped into the hallway, the weight of everything unsaid seemed to cling to the air around him. Vivian was not the killer, but she had given Madeleine the language of vengeance, and someone else had turned it into murder. Chapter 12. A whisper in the garden. The rain had lightened by the time Poirot stepped into the gardens, but the scent of damp earth hung heavy in the air. The stone paths were slick with moisture, and the roses bent their heads under the weight of water. Few ventured outside in such weather. Fewer still to the old southern alcove, a vine-covered pocket behind the fountain where Madeleine had often been seen walking alone. Poirot walked slowly, umbrella in hand, shoes tapping against the flagstones. His mind was quiet but focused, the way it became when the final shape of truth began to form, still hazy but definite. There was one last piece needed, one final emotion to be pressed before the whole picture clicked into place, and he suspected it was hiding beneath the calm surface of Charles Fairfax. The Englishman was exactly where Poirot expected, seated on the wrought iron bench beneath the cypress tree, smoking a slender pipe, seemingly impervious to both rain and inquiry. He looked up as Poirot approached, gave a polite nod, but did not speak. Poirot sat beside him, adjusting the angle of his umbrella slightly so the smoke would drift away. "You are a difficult man to read, Monsieur Fairfax," he said softly. "I've been told that before," Fairfax replied, "usually by people trying to sell me something." Poirot chuckled lightly. "And what about people trying to understand you?" Fairfax turned his gaze forward, toward the still pool of the fountain. "They usually give up." "Let us hope I prove the exception," Poirot said. "Tell me, why did you really come to Chateau Laroche?" Fairfax took a long pull from his pipe. "Vivienne invited me. I thought it would be a chance to escape London for a while. The air here is cleaner." "But you did not expect Madeleine Delacroix to be here?" Fairfax's jaw shifted slightly. Number Poirot studied him. "You knew her long before this gathering, not as a guest, but as something more." "I knew her mother," Fairfax said at last. "A long time ago. We were brief." "Etienne," Fairfax exhaled. "That was the name she used. I met her in Paris. We spent 6 months together. She vanished one morning. No note, no goodbye. Years later, I saw a photo of Madeleine in a magazine. She had her mother's eyes. I knew immediately. And you never contacted her?" "She would have wanted nothing from me," Fairfax said tightly. "I had nothing to give." Poirot's eyes softened. "That is where you are mistaken, monsieur. She came here with that mirror, with that music box. She was trying to speak, perhaps not directly to you, but to the silence you left behind." Fairfax looked away. "And now she's dead. So what good is any of it?" Poirot didn't answer at once. Instead, he let the rain fill the silence. Then he said, "When someone like Madeleine dies, they do not vanish entirely. They echo, in anger, in fear, in vengeance." He turned to Fairfax. "You did not kill her, but someone very close to her believed she was about to reveal something dangerous, something buried in the past, and now that person is desperately trying to erase her story before it can be understood." Fairfax frowned. "You think she left a clue in that music box?" "I think she left the echo of a choice," Poirot replied, "and someone could not bear to let her make it." He stood. "You may think you were absent, monsieur, but absence shapes as surely as presence. It is the outline of every silence. And I believe Madeleine came here hoping to draw that outline, to complete something unfinished." Fairfax didn't move, but the pipe in his hand had gone cold. Poirot left him. There, under the grey sky, surrounded by dripping vines and soft thunder. Back inside the house, Odette met him in the entryway, wringing her hands. "Monsieur Poirot, there's something I must show you." She held out a thin envelope, smudged slightly at the corner. "I found this in the servants' laundry this morning. I don't know how it got there." Poirot took the envelope and turned it over. The seal was broken. Inside was a single folded page. He read it once, then again. His expression did not change. But in his eyes, something clicked. "Where did you find this exactly?" he asked. "In the pocket of one of Jean's jackets," she whispered. "My brother's. He said it wasn't his." Poirot nodded, tucked the page into his inner coat pocket and whispered to himself, "Alors," the final thread. He straightened his cuffs, his voice sharpening into purpose. "It is time, mademoiselle. Please inform Inspector Vautrin. Tonight we gather everyone. The play ends now." Chapter 13. Curtains drawn. Night had fallen again over Chateau Laroche, but this time The air was electric. The drawing room had been prepared per Poirot's instruction. The chairs rearranged in a semicircle, the fire stoked to a low, flickering warmth, and a single candelabrum placed in the centre of the room, like the spotlight in an otherwise dark theatre. Outside, rain whispered against the windows. Inside, tension pulsed like an undercurrent in the floorboards. One by one, the guests arrived. Vivienne Langlois entered first, resplendent in a dark emerald gown, her composure practiced and impenetrable. Claudine followed, pale and tight-lipped, her eyes flitting to every corner of the room as if she expected a voice from the shadows. Roland Aubrey wore a deep burgundy waistcoat and a look of thinly veiled anticipation. Mr. Fairfax came in last, quiet, shoulders squared, as though preparing for an execution. Odette hovered in the doorway, hesitant to enter, and Poirot gestured gently for her to stay. Héloïse Martel was absent, but not forgotten. She remained upstairs under supervision, having suffered what Vautrin suspected was a panic spell. Poirot had suspected something else. The guests sat. Poirot remained standing. "Mes amis," he began, "I have asked you here not merely to review the events of the past days, but to illuminate them. We are not in a courtroom. We are in a theatre of truth, where the final act is overdue." He paused, letting the silence settle. Madeleine Delacroix did not die from accident or carelessness. She died by design, murdered, as we know, with poison hidden in a silver compact mirror. But that was only the beginning. Since then, someone has stolen the music box she gave to Mademoiselle Martel and attempted to erase whatever secrets it may have contained. Vautrin, standing beside the door, nodded once in silent agreement. Poirot continued, "We have heard of arguments, of jealousies, of rivalries, but at the centre of this storm was not hate, it was fear. Fear of what Madeleine knew, fear of what she might say." He moved slowly in front of the assembled group. "I now know who committed the murder, and I know why." A flicker of movement. Roland shifted in his seat. Poirot turned to Claudine. "You feared Madeleine would expose you, that she would unveil something in your past. She was your friend once, yes, but you resented her." Claudine inhaled sharply. "That's not true. I resented her cruelty, perhaps, but not enough to kill her." Poirot nodded, satisfied. "And you did not." He turned next to Vivienne. "Madame Langlois, you bore the sting of betrayal. Madeleine stole from you, your writing, your ideas. She tried to wear your image like a second skin." Vivienne's expression remained neutral. "Yes, but you too are innocent," Poirot said, "because in your world, reputation is preserved by silence, not murder." Then Poirot stepped forward and slowly opened the folded page he had received from Odette that morning. The candlelight shimmered on the paper. "This letter," he said, "was intended for Mademoiselle Martel, hidden in the lining of the music box. But someone removed it and tried to dispose of it, unsuccessfully." He read aloud. "You may not understand it now, but you are the only one I trust with this. The tune will speak when I cannot. I do not know if he will come, but if he does, he must know. He was the reason I stayed silent for so long." There was a pause, a shift. Poirot looked at Mr. Fairfax. "You knew, didn't you," he said softly, "that she was your daughter?" Fairfax said nothing. "She did not want revenge from you. She wanted recognition, but you were not the one she feared." Poirot turned slowly. "That person is you, Monsieur Aubrey." Roland stiffened. "That's absurd." Poirot raised a hand. On the surface, yes, but only on the surface. You and Madeleine had history. Not romantic, but psychological. You mined her thoughts for your characters. You followed her movements for your dialogue. You relied on her brilliance, until she threatened to expose your dependence. You think I would kill for that? Roland scoffed. Poirot stepped forward, his voice suddenly sharp. You poisoned her with atropine, disguised in a compact mirror you had stolen years ago from Vivienne. You placed it in her room, knowing she would use it before joining the others. And then you waited. When she began to crumble, you watched. Roland's hands gripped the arms of the chair. You have no proof. No, you were the only one who could replicate the mirror's engraving. You worked with set designers and prop artisans for years, and it was you who gave her the idea of symbols as weapons. You planted the language she used to undo you. Poirot stepped aside, letting the silence pour in. You thought she had written a story exposing you, that she'd share your manipulations, but she hadn't. She only wrote a memory, a small, honest moment, and you killed her to prevent something that never existed. The fire crackled behind them, and then Roland Aubrey broke. She was going to destroy me, he whispered. She knew I had nothing left. She always knew. That mirror, she would have held it up to the world. Poirot bowed his head slightly. And now the world sees, monsieur, not through her mirror, but through your cracks. Vautrin moved forward without a word. The playwright rose with slow, defeated steps. The curtain, at last, had fallen. Chapter 14. The final piece falls into place. The drawing room slowly emptied after Roland Aubrey was escorted out. The storm outside had intensified, now beating the windows with steady fingers of rain, as if the sky itself wanted in. Yet inside, all was still, save for the deep, echoing silence that always followed a confession. Vivienne was the last to leave the room, pausing beside Poirot with something unreadable in her expression. She won, she murmured. Even in death, Madeleine had the last word. Poirot looked at her. Non, madame, it was not a contest. She only ever wanted to be heard, not exalted, not feared, only heard. Vivienne gave a bitter smile and left. Poirot remained standing, unmoving. Vautrin approached him quietly, arms crossed. Do you truly believe he acted alone? The inspector asked. That Aubrey conceived it all without help? Poirot's gaze remained fixed on the fire. Ah, mon ami, you asked the right question, but at the wrong time. Vautrin frowned. What do you mean? Poirot turned toward him. There are crimes of method and crimes of memory. Aubrey committed the former, but someone else set the stage for all of this years ago. Someone who taught Madeleine the language of secrets, who left her hungry to reclaim a truth no one would name. He reached into his coat and retrieved the small brass key, the one that had once unlocked the stolen music box. He turned it over in his hand, slowly, thoughtfully. The mirror was an act of panic, he said, but the box, that was intention. Vautrin nodded. And what of the music box now? Still missing. No, Poirot said, not missing, hidden. There is a difference. He glanced up the staircase. We must speak with Jean, the groundskeeper, Odette's brother. The jacket where the letter was found, it was not worn that day, and I believe Jean has seen far more than he admits. Within 10 minutes, Jean was seated in the library, fidgeting under the inspector's sharp gaze. He was a wiry young man, barely 20, with dirt still under his nails, and a defensiveness that masked unease. I didn't kill anyone, Jean said immediately. No one has accused you of such, Poirot said gently. But you found the music box, did you not? Jean looked startled. How did you... Poirot nodded slowly. "You're not trained in concealment, monsieur. You placed the letter in your pocket, forgot to burn it, and left the box in the potting shed. You thought it was just a trinket until you opened it and saw the letter. Then panic took hold. John's shoulders sagged. I didn't know what it was. I saw someone drop it the morning after she died. In the garden, near the hydrangeas. I didn't recognize who. Just a figure. I picked it up, and when I heard she'd been poisoned, I didn't want to be involved." "And yet you became involved," Poirot said softly, "because the moment you touched that box, you held the final echo of Madeleine's voice." Jean looked down at his hands. "I'm sorry." Poirot patted his shoulder. "You did not kill her. You simply carried the weight of what was left behind." Later that evening, the box was recovered from the potting shed, wrapped in a faded handkerchief and tucked beneath a loose floorboard. It was intact. Poirot took it to the music room alone. He turned the key. The melody began again, soft, halting, but this time allowed to finish. It ended not with a flourish, but a lull, a single, descending line of notes that trailed into quiet. Beneath the velvet interior, he found what he suspected, a second slip of paper. It was not a confession. It was a dedication. "To those who will never speak for themselves, may this melody keep your silence company." Poirot stood in the silence of the room, the box closed in his hand. Madeleine Delacroix had not written revenge. She had written remembrance, and it had cost her everything. Chapter 15. Echoes at midnight. Long after the fire had died down and the estate had gone to sleep beneath the morning veil of clouds, Poirot sat alone in the music room. The recovered music box rested on the polished piano lid beside the folded dedication he had found. Outside, the storm had finally broken, leaving only the quiet drip of rainwater from the eaves and the occasional groan of wood settling into stillness. The melody played softly again, once more, then once more still, until the mechanism wound down in a final, breathless sigh. Poirot closed the lid with care, as if sealing a casket. He did not move when the door creaked open. Eloise stood there in her dressing gown, her hair loose over one shoulder, her face pale but composed. "I couldn't sleep," she said. "The music, it drew me down." Poirot offered her a chair near the hearth. "You are not the only one kept awake by unfinished music." She sat, wrapping the robe tighter around herself. "Was it true?" she asked. "Everything you said, that Madeleine left this for someone to listen, someone like me?" Poirot nodded. "She trusted you. Not because you were closest to her, but because you listened without interrupting." Eloise looked at the music box. She was always watching. I think she saw things in people that made them uncomfortable. "Yes," Poirot said. "She had the gift of cutting through pretense. That made her dangerous to those who lived by illusion." There was a pause. Then Eloise asked the question that had been waiting all along. "Do you believe she meant to die?" Poirot hesitated. "I believe she suspected someone would try to stop her. I do not believe she wished to die. She prepared too carefully. This box, the letter, the mirror, these were not a farewell. They were insurance. She thought she might survive long enough to finish what she started." Eloise lowered her gaze. Then she failed. "No," Poirot said gently. "She succeeded, just not in the way she expected." They sat in silence for a while. Then Poirot stood and crossed to a small cabinet by the window. From within he retrieved a leather-bound journal, old, cracked at the spine. "She left this as well," he said, "hidden behind the piano frame. It's not her writing. It belonged to her mother, Etienne, the final piece." Eloise leaned forward. What's in it? Letters, sketches, dreams, Poirot replied. And shame, much shame. Etienne was cast out from a wealthy family, disowned after falling in love with someone considered beneath her station. She changed her name, fled to Paris, died in obscurity. Madeleine inherited the story, but not the voice to tell it. She tried to reclaim it, Eloise whispered, through mirrors, through music, through symbols. Poirot nodded. She was always trying to turn memory into something permanent, something that couldn't be denied. Eloise stood slowly. Will you publish it? The journal? That is not my choice, Poirot said. It belongs to someone else now. She looked down at her hands. I'll read it. Someday. Poirot studied her for a moment, then nodded. Bon, when you are ready. Eloise turned toward the door but stopped before leaving. Did you ever hate it, Monsieur Poirot? Knowing how people work, seeing what they hide? Poirot smiled faintly. Not hate. But I have learned to be careful with silence. It speaks far louder than most realize. When she was gone, Poirot remained a little longer in the quiet. He ran his fingers once more over the surface of the music box. A story silenced, a truth unearthed, a performance finished. But in its place, echoes. And sometimes echoes were all justice could leave behind. He rose at last and walked to the window. The moon had broken through the thinning clouds, casting its pale light over the drenched gardens. Madeleine Delacroix had not asked for vengeance. She had asked to be remembered. And now she would be. Chapter 16. The shadow on the stairs morning returned to Chateau Laroche with a deceptive calm. The rain had stopped. The skies cleared, unveiling a soft, indifferent blue that settled over the gardens like a veil after morning. Birds had begun to sing again from the distant poplars, as if unaware or unconcerned that something terrible had happened within those stone walls. Inside the estate, the air remained thick. Suspicion had left, but unease lingered like perfume on old lace. The guests packed their bags. The rooms were being aired. A return to normalcy was attempting to take root, but it struggled against something invisible and enduring. Poirot sat in the sunroom, where light poured through wide panes of glass. He had taken his breakfast late, toast with quince jam, black coffee, and silence. It was not over yet. One final question clung to him like a splinter. He had not heard the last lie. A quiet knock came at the glass door. Odette stepped in, her eyes darting behind her as though afraid of being seen. Monsieur Poirot, she said, her voice low. There is something else. Poirot gestured for her to sit. Oui, mademoiselle. Odette held her hands tightly in her lap. Jean remembered something this morning, something he didn't tell the inspector. He was too afraid. But I convinced him it mattered. Poirot leaned forward slightly. Go on. The morning after Madeleine was found, she whispered, Jean was cleaning out the garden bins near the south hedge. That's where he saw Monsieur Aubry's gloves, buried under damp paper and flower stems. His gloves? Odette nodded. Jean thought nothing of it until later. But when he picked them up, they were stained with powder, like makeup. Poirot's brow furrowed. And he never told anyone? He burned them. Poirot closed his eyes briefly. Panic has a scent, mademoiselle, and your brother is saturated with it. Odette swallowed. Do you think he was involved? No, Poirot said, but someone made sure he would appear to be, someone who needed a servant's pocket to become a hiding place. He stood. There is one conversation I have delayed too long. Please send for Claudine Morel. Ask her to meet me in the upper gallery. Odette nodded and hurried out. Moments later, Poirot climbed the sweeping staircase that led to the upper floor. The gallery was lined with oil portraits, men in military uniforms, women in gowns that defied time. At the far end stood tall windows overlooking the orchard. This had once been Madeleine's favorite place to walk at dusk, according to Eloise. Claudine arrived minutes later, dressed in charcoal grey, her expression cool and restrained. "You wished to see me, Monsieur Poirot?" she asked. "Yes," he said, facing one of the portraits. "Because there is one thing that still troubles me." "Only one?" He turned to her. "The compact mirror." Claudine's smile didn't quite reach her eyes. "You've already proven Roland was the one who planted it." "Yes, but someone had to know where to find it, and you, madame, told me early on that Madeleine had used a gold mirror every day of the weekend, that the silver one was new." "Yes, that's what I saw." "No," Poirot said gently. "It is what you wanted me to believe." Her eyes narrowed. "Excuse me?" "I checked with Odette. She confirmed that the silver mirror had been in Madeleine's handbag from the moment she arrived. It was never out of sight. Not until the moment she died. Only someone who had seen the mirror earlier could describe it as unusual, and yet when I asked you, you were certain it had never been hers." Claudine's voice dropped. "So what do you think I did, Poirot?" "I think," he said slowly, "you were the first to realize she had returned with more than luggage, that she had returned with memory, that she was going to speak." Her voice sharpened. "She was always going to speak, always circling us like a hawk. You don't know what it's like living beneath that kind of threat." Poirot nodded. "And so you panicked." "I didn't kill her," Claudine said quickly. "I didn't know Roland would actually do it." "But you told him," Poirot said, his tone as soft as silk. "You told him what she was carrying, what she had written. You gave him the instrument." Claudine's breath caught. "I only warned him. I never thought—" Poirot stepped closer. "But you knew he would stop her." A silence fell. "Yes," she whispered. "I knew." Poirot's voice was grave. "You did not poison her hand, but you guided the blade." She turned her face to the window, shoulders stiff, and Poirot, after a long moment, turned away. Two culprits, one killer, one accomplice in fear, and both had believed themselves justified, but Madeleine had still spoken, through mirrors, through music, through the silence that came after, and Poirot, her final witness, had heard every word. Chapter 17. The Weight of a Whisper. The next morning broke with thin golden light, sliding between the curtains of Chateau La Roche. For the first time in days, the estate was calm, not in the way of peace, but of exhaustion, as if the house itself had finally exhaled after holding its breath through days of deceit, silence, and revelation. In the grand hall, trunks were stacked, guests were departing. What had begun as a weekend of indulgence had become a memory none of them would speak of willingly. And yet, as Poirot moved among the farewells, he noticed something new in the faces that lingered, no longer guarded, not quite free, but unmasked. Inspector Vautrin stood by the front doors, signing off the departure of Jean Marchand and his sister, Odette. The young groundskeeper kept his eyes down, while Odette clutched her coat tightly and gave Poirot a small, grateful nod before they stepped outside into the morning. Poirot turned and found Vivienne Langlois at the bottom of the stairs. She was dressed impeccably once again, though the edges of her perfection were frayed. Her voice, however, had lost none of its precision. "So, it ends," she said. "On the contrary, madame," Poirot replied, "it begins. For everyone left behind by Madeleine Delacroix. She studied him. She made enemies, you know. Perhaps she wanted to." Poirot gave a slight tilt of the head. Perhaps she believed that if one cannot belong in the world as it is, then one must remake it with memory. Vivienne looked away. She didn't belong here. Not really. But perhaps none of us did. Poirot said nothing. Moments later, Claudine stepped down the stairs, a small suitcase in hand. She looked drawn but composed. Vivienne gave her a long, unreadable look, then walked away without a word. Claudine approached Poirot. "Are you going to turn me in?" Poirot studied her. "You committed no crime by law, madame, but in your heart you must live with the weight of the whisper you passed along, and the echo it became." Claudine flinched. "I only wanted to protect myself." "Many people do," he said, "but self-preservation is often the first betrayal." She looked as though she might speak again, then thought better of it. With a quiet nod, she turned and walked out the door, the sound of her shoes vanishing into the gravel beyond. Poirot remained in the hall for some time, watching as staff moved about, reclaiming the rhythm of routine. But the soul of the place had shifted. Madeleine's presence, once considered a disturbance, had left a void deeper than anyone anticipated. That afternoon he visited the winter salon one last time. The chair where she had sat was still in its place. The French doors stood open to the garden where new lilies, fresh ones, pale and perfumed, had been planted in her memory. Eloise had done it quietly that morning, without announcement or fanfare. Poirot had watched from a distance. He sat in the armchair opposite the one Madeleine had occupied. From his coat he retrieved the folded dedication she had left in the music box. His fingers rested on it, but he did not open it again. Instead, he closed his eyes. He heard her voice, not in speech, but in music, in stillness, in the weight of everything left unsaid. She had been brave, yes, and reckless, but most of all she had been alone in her knowledge. And yet, in her death, she had found her audience. Poirot rose slowly, taking one last look at the silver-framed mirror on the mantelpiece, its surface now polished, reflecting the soft light of the window. Not the mirror that had killed her, but another one. And in its surface, Poirot saw not his own face, but the echo of hers. Delacroix, a name that meant of the cross, a burden carried, a truth buried, a life reclaimed, and in the end, a whisper made whole. Chapter 18. The Silence That Spoke. 2 days later, Hercule Poirot left Château Laroche. The car waited in the drive beneath the tall sycamores. The staff stood respectfully near the entrance. Vivienne Langlois did not come to say goodbye. Her pride was not the kind that allowed for farewells. Claudine Morel had already disappeared into the folds of Paris, likely to retreat into another kind of silence, one less stained. The storm had passed, but Poirot knew the air inside that house would hold the memory of Madeleine Delacroix for a very long time. Before leaving, he visited the estate's library one last time. The journal of Etienne, Madeleine's mother, remained with him, not as evidence, not as property, but as a final act of custodianship. Madeleine had tried to restore a story buried before her birth. Poirot intended to ensure it would not be forgotten again. He sat in the quiet of the leather armchair, fingers resting gently on the faded cover. So much had hinged on perception. A silver mirror designed not for vanity, but for vengeance. A music box, carrying a melody fragmented by trauma, a stolen story that had shaped the lives of 2 women and ended one. And all along, Madeleine had been walking the knife's edge between revelation and ruin. Poirot had seen it before, in many forms, men driven mad by hidden debts, women ruined by secrets too bitter to bear. but rarely had he seen someone build their own murder so deliberately, with such tragic foresight. She had not designed her death, but she had anticipated it. And she had laid a path of clues as one might lay down breadcrumbs in a forest where wolves circle in the dark. Roland Aubrey's guilt had been born not from malice, but desperation. He had run out of ideas, run out of words, and Madeleine, with her knowing glances and veiled threats, had become the mirror in which his fraudulence reflected. She never needed to publish his theft. She only needed him to know she could. But it had been Claudine Morel, silent, always watching, who had lit the match and passed it along. In her fear of exposure, she had given Aubrey the very detail he needed. The old mirror. A symbol he could weaponize. She hadn't poured the poison, but her whisper had guided the hand. And what of Charles Fairfax? He had walked through the narrative like a ghost, the absent father who had buried his guilt beneath layers of detachment. Madeleine had left him the smallest olive branch, a coded phrase in her letter, a single unfinished tune. Not forgiveness, not even confrontation, just presence. She had left the truth for him to find if he chose. Poirot stood at last, tucking the journal under his arm. He glanced once more at the hearth, where the fire had long gone cold. In Madeleine's death, the truth had not brought healing, but it had brought light. Outside, Eloise Martel waited beneath the sycamores, holding a thin leather satchel and the music box, restored, repaired, whole. She had chosen to leave Chateau Laroche as well. Poirot had arranged for her to travel to Geneva, where a conservatory would take her in on scholarship, one of his quiet favours, never mentioned aloud. As Poirot approached, she looked up. "You think she'll rest now?" she asked. He smiled. "Madeleine Delacroix never sought rest, mademoiselle. She sought remembrance, and in that she has succeeded." Eloise glanced down at the music box in her hands. "I'll take care of it. I know you will." He stepped into the car, and as it pulled away, he looked back one final time. Chateau Laroche stood bathed in light, no longer ominous, only old. A place filled with mirrors, yes, but now also with echoes. Echoes of a woman who had dared to remember, to challenge, to mourn what no one else would speak of. And as the car turned down the gravel road, Hercule Poirot closed his eyes, folded his hands, and said softly, "Justice, she does not always shout. Sometimes she whispers." And this time, someone had listened. Epilogue. The quiet that remains. It was nearly a month after the events at Chateau Laroche when Hercule Poirot received a letter, delivered by hand, addressed in careful script, sealed with no crest. He recognized the handwriting at once. It was from Eloise Martel. The letter was short, but it carried weight between the lines, like the final notes of a melody that refused to fade. She wrote from Geneva. The conservatory had accepted her. She had begun teaching part-time and had been invited to perform publicly in the spring. She had taken the music box with her, not as a relic of tragedy, she wrote, but as a lesson in listening, to silences, to memory, to things hidden beneath melody. She enclosed a small folded page within the envelope, a passage copied carefully in Madeleine Delacroix's handwriting. Poirot opened it slowly and read, "Truth is not a weapon, it is a wound. But wounds, if left open long enough, begin to sing." He folded the letter and placed it beside the journal of Etienne, which now lived in his private collection, filed not among evidence, but among memories. Madeleine had not simply sought justice. She had orchestrated a reckoning of identity, of what was stolen, of what was silenced, and in the end, she had not shouted. She had whispered. Poirot had seen many crimes in his time. Some were born of greed, others of passion, some of madness, others of cold calculation. But this had been something more, a crime born from fear of being seen and of someone daring to see too clearly. Vivienne Langlois remained in the public eye. Her reputation, though bruised, had not crumbled. The death at her estate had been deemed the result of a single man's madness, Roland Aubrey, the tortured artist who had crossed a fatal line. The newspapers, eager for tragedy laced with glamour, gave the public its villain and moved on. Vivienne herself made no further public statement. But in private, Poirot knew she had suffered. Not for Madeleine, necessarily, but for the history unspoken between them. In one of her final conversations with him, she had confessed something quietly, without fanfare. "She was more like me than I ever wanted to admit," she'd said, "and far braver than I ever allowed myself to be." Poirot had only nodded. Claudine Morel vanished from society. Some said she moved to Italy. Others claimed she had entered a religious retreat, or that she had taken to writing under a pseudonym. Poirot did not inquire further. Her guilt was not legal, but it was profound, and he suspected she would carry it, folded beneath her skin, for the rest of her life. As for Charles Fairfax, the former diplomat had returned to England without fanfare. He sent no letters, offered no public acknowledgement. But Poirot later learned that a small sum, substantial yet untraceable, had been transferred to a scholarship fund in Madeleine's name. The donor was anonymous. It was enough. In the weeks that followed, Poirot found himself thinking often about mirrors. Not the kind that reflect one's face, but the kind that reflect one's absence. Madeleine Delacroix had used symbols the way others used sentences. A poisoned mirror not as vanity, but as statement. A music box not as nostalgia, but as confession. A note, a tune, a hesitation in perfume, all threads she had woven into her final performance. And not for spectacle, for remembrance. He recalled something she had written once, in a letter now preserved among his files. "We do not die when our hearts stop. We die when no one recalls the shape of our voice." Her voice remained. Through Eloise's music, through Etienne's journal, through a melody that had been silenced and later played to its final note. Poirot spent an afternoon 1 week later reading the journal again, slowly. Etienne had written with longing, with regret, with a rage restrained only by ink. There had been love in her life, a brief, astonishing love that had ended when her family had forced her out. She had changed her name to escape disgrace, and she had raised Madeleine alone, never revealing the father's identity until her final years. That father had been Charles Fairfax, and though he had not known it until it was too late, Madeleine had known. She had always known. What she sought from him wasn't revenge, it was confirmation. That she was not an invention, that she had not been conjured from absence, left to shape herself from silence. But Fairfax had remained distant, and Roland Aubrey, who fed upon the emotions of others for his art, had sensed Madeleine's pain, used it, feared it, and when she threatened to eclipse him, he killed her. It had taken Poirot days to unpick that knot of psychology, because this had not been a murder of passion, it had been a murder of dread, the kind of dread born when someone realizes their lies have a witness. Poirot poured himself a cup of tea, stared out the window of his flat in London, and let his mind drift once more to the garden at Château Laroche. The fresh lilies, the weight of the compact mirror, the final melody, and to Madeleine Delacroix, who had not screamed when she died, who had not cursed her killer, who had not begged for justice, only left behind the tools with which it could be found. In his long career, Hercule Poirot had always trusted logic, but in this case it had been something else that had guided him. A perfume, a fragment of music, a woman's silence that refused to stay silent. He picked up the music box Eloise had returned to him, just for safekeeping, and turned the key. The melody played, and Poirot, eyes closed, listened to its final note, not with triumph, but with reverence. For justice had come, not loudly, but just loud enough.